This session is called The Evolution of the 21st Century Census of Population and Housing. Census statistics are the foundation of a nation's decision-making process, and the cycle of population censuses remains a core activity of national statistical institutes. In many countries, the censuses of population and housing are evolving, particularly in response to the increasing availability of administrative data. This session will focus on the role of research to inform the evolution of censuses and highlight the associated statistical challenges. This session will also include reflections on how the COVID-19 pandemic has influenced research and evolution paths. The discussant for this session will be James Brown, Professor of Official Statistics at the University Technology Sydney, who has published extensively on census methodology. Afsaneh Yazdani from the Statistical Division of the United Nations for Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific is our first speaker. The COVID-19 pandemic and natural disasters have coincided with the 2020 round of population and housing censuses across Asia and the Pacific. This has impacted plans, operations, budgets, and timing. It is time to rethink what a 21st century census may look like, including the role that administrative data may play. Ms. Valérie Roux is the Chief of the Department of Demography at INSEE, which is the French Statistics Institute. She is our second speaker. The French census has evolved from a 7 or 9 yearly event to an annual event. Many innovations have taken place since 2004 to adapt the rolling census to changes in society. The COVID-19 pandemic has raised questions about the feasibility of the 2021 annual census survey and how administrative data can support the production of census data. Gary Dunnett is our third speaker. He's the Deputy Chief Methodologist at Statistics New Zealand. On the basis of Stats New Zealand's research, its government has agreed to a long-term goal of administrative-based census supported by sample surveys. The research laid the foundations for the use of administrative data in the 2018 and the 2023 censuses. So I hope you enjoy this session.
Hello everyone, it is my pleasure to be here with you to briefly present how censuses in Asia and the Pacific are evolving. My presentation covers a short introduction to the history of censuses, has a light touch on some important achievements of the 20th century, and looks into censuses in 21st century, focusing on the Asia-Pacific countries. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, the modern population census began to evolve in 17th century. Prior to that time, inventories of persons, taxpayers, or valuables were made, but they were for the purpose of control, for example, to identify who should be taxed, and they did not seek to count all the people or even a representative sample of them. Some examples are in ancient world, such as Persia and China. One more recent example is Australian muster in 1788. The contemporary concept of population census as a complete enumeration of all people originated in the 17th and 18th centuries to comprehend the basic structure and trends of the society, rather than identify or control individuals. India's first census as a complete enumeration in 1881 is one of the earliest in Asia and the Pacific. In the second half of the 20th century, United Nations started supporting census taking in countries. In March 1947, the Economic and Social Council, taking note of recommendations of the Statistical Commission and the Population Commission, invited the United Nations Secretary General to offer advice and assistance to member states on conducting population censuses. In August same year, the United Nations Population Commission requested the Secretary General to call the attention of member states to adequate provision for population census and proposed a minimum list of subjects to be covered in 1950 censuses. In the year after, the United Nations Statistical Commission recorded national-level plans for census taking. There, 10 Asia-Pacific countries recorded their most recent or upcoming censuses. Since 1950, United Nations Statistics Division has served as the Secretariat for the Decennial World Programme on Population and Housing Censuses, promoting censuses worldwide under the supervision of the United Nations Statistical Commission. Promoting efforts include setting standards and methods, for example, through publication of principles and recommendations for the population and housing censuses, providing technical assistance to strengthen national statistical capacity to conduct censuses, and compiling and disseminating census results online and in print. In addition to UNSD, the UNFPA is also playing a significant role in providing technical and financial assistance to population censuses. The World Programme on Population and Housing Censuses offers some interesting insights into the history of censuses. Official documents dates back to 1947 when the Americas identified procedural items such as de facto and de jure concepts, definition of urban and rural areas, problems of enumerating tribes, integration of agriculture and population census, and administrative issues. All these issues remain relevant today. For example, the methodology for delineation of urban and rural areas was discussed in the Statistical Commission in 2020, about 70 years after the Americas raised it in 1947. The 20th century also features one fortunate evolution, the strengthening of data protection, following the widespread misuse of census data during the census and during the Second World War. Actually, the first documented misuse of census data occurred in 1910 by the United States Selective Service System to verify age of individuals suspected of lying about their draft eligibility. However, the use of census data to identify individuals to be rounded up during the Second World War, both in Germany and the United States, is cited as a tragic example of census data misuse. By the way, thanks to data protection, the attempts of U.S. federal authorities to access American census data for locating Muslim Americans after the September 11 terrorist attacks were unsuccessful. In the 21st century, there have been 3 rounds of population censuses, 2000, 2010, and 2020. And based on the UNSC website, the number of countries missing census rounds is falling. Censuses in the 21st century are taking place in a complex setting. New global commitments such as 2030 Agenda have led to an increasing demand for more disaggregated statistics. At the same time, disasters and the recent outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic add to the complication. However, with the technological advancements and the availability of new data sources, national statistical offices now have lots of alternatives available to them. To monitor census taking in the world, the UNSC has conducted a couple of surveys. The Global Survey of National Statistical Offices on plans for the 2020 round of population censuses, which was conducted in mid-2019, gathered responses from 158 countries. 41 responses from Asia-Pacific countries are available. Also, 2 rounds of surveys on the impact of COVID-19 were conducted, which targeted countries that had originally scheduled the census in the year 2020 or 2021. In second round, 23 countries from Asia Pacific responded. In following slides, we will look into the Asia Pacific censuses through the lens of the UNSC surveys. According to the findings of the UNSC survey on plans for the 2020 rounds of censuses, in Asia Pacific, a majority of 78% use or will use traditional approach to the censuses, meaning full field enumeration with paper or electronic questionnaire. The rest utilize administrative registers. We can see that 12% combined registers and full field enumeration, 7% combined registers and sample survey, and about 3% conduct full register-based census. In Asia Pacific, we also have an example of hybrid census in Afghanistan. The hybrid census is an innovative methodology for generating spatially disaggregated population estimates in situations where traditional census enumeration is impossible. In the hybrid census, a small-scale survey is conducted, which is called microcensus. Then, through statistical modeling techniques, counts of the population within small defined areas from microcensus are combined with satellite imagery in order to estimate population and their characteristics in areas not covered by the microcensus. New methods of data collection, such as CAPI, CAVI, and CATI, are now used in censuses. Use of portable electronic devices allow capturing GPS coordinates, facilitates field operation, and improves management and supervision of enumerators. The UNSC survey shows in Asia Pacific, face-to-face interviews with an electronic questionnaire are the most commonly used method. It is followed by the face-to-face interview with paper questionnaire. Internet self-response is also getting more popularity with 48% of countries. However, other methods such as self-response with drop-off pickup or mail-out, mail-back, or telephone interview are not that common. Good to mention that 65% of countries are benefiting from a combination of these methods. Another development in census taking is the growing role and use of geographic information systems. Electronic data collection devices allow capturing GPS coordinates, which result in an adequate georeference statistical information infrastructure. The UNSC survey results indicate that in Asia and the Pacific, only 27% of countries have no plan to collect GPS coordinates. The majority of countries are planning to capture GPS coordinates of buildings and housing units, enumeration areas, or other features. Countries are also expanding use of innovative methods for dissemination and visualization of census data in a more user-friendly manner, as well as to promote web-based interactive, free and open dissemination platforms capable of hosting geospatial data. According to the findings of the UNSC survey, 59% of countries in Asia Pacific aim to provide interactive online databases, followed by 54% providing anonymized datasets. 46% will offer GIS and web-based mapping tools. Crisis has encouraged evolution in census taking. One interesting case study of when censuses are disrupted, postponed, or even cancelled is New Zealand, with censuses in 1931 and 1941 being cancelled due to Great Depression and World War, and 2011 census being cancelled and rescheduled due to an earthquake hit less than 2 weeks from the census. New Zealand was also challenged with a lower than expected response rate to its census in 2018, which compelled them to apply a truly innovative approach, combining census records with administrative data to address missing census records. COVID-19 is now presenting a crisis situation. As mentioned earlier, to assess the pandemic impact on census taking in 2020, UNSD has conducted 2 surveys. Based on the results of the second survey in Asia and the Pacific, 78% of 23 responding countries were affected by the COVID-19 outbreak. Those not affected were the countries who had already concluded their field operation, implemented full register-based census, or had a stable COVID-19 situation in their countries. As a result of crisis, countries had postponed the census or extended the enumeration period. Main challenges countries faced include requirement to reduce face-to-face interaction, mobility restrictions, procurement and staffing difficulties, and funding limitations due to reallocation of government budgets for other priorities such as health and economic recovery. The UNSC second survey reveals a rush toward utilizing innovative approaches to tackle the challenges raised by the pandemic. 72% of responding Asia-Pacific countries whose censuses were impacted by the pandemic declared a change or adaptation to their planned approaches and methods. Common approaches include self-enumeration with mail-out, mail-back, or drop-off pickup, telephone data collection, online data collection, and the utilization of administrative data. Countries show greater reliance on online data collection methods, such as in Malaysia and Indonesia. Also, an unwelcome tendency toward online and virtual training for enumerators can be noticed. To conclude, since 17th century, census taking has evolved. Technology has enabled not only processing, but also collection and dissemination methodologies. Technology is also being a data source in its own right, as in the case of Afghanistan and the use of satellite images. Disasters have also provided opportunities for evolution, such as tightening data protection after the misuse of census data in Second World War, an innovative approach in New Zealand when facing with lower than expected response rates. COVID-19 is encouraging further evolutionary steps across Asia and the Pacific. Technology, data integration, big data sources such as satellite images are sure to be features of the population census landscape of the remainder of 21st century. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Your questions and comments are welcome.
So, hello everybody. Today I am going to talk about the French rolling census, because just like we have an original laicity model in France, we also have an original census model. I will present you the adaptations we made in the face of structural evolutions, but also in the face of unexpected events. My presentation will be divided in 3 parts. First, I will talk about the original method we have with this rolling census. Then I will explain the innovations we implemented to adapt to changes in society and to modernize our process. And then I will explain the new challenges we faced in 2020 and 2021 with the COVID pandemic, just like many of you have had to do with this unexpected event. So let's talk about our original method. Since 2004, each year we implement a census survey in 8,000 municipalities. This survey takes place during 4 to 5 weeks in January and February. It concerns each year 5 million dwellings and 9 million inhabitants. And it is done with a high collaboration with municipalities. The municipalities hires the enumerators and are responsible for the field operations. And we at the National Institute are in charge of the training, of the control, and also of the dissemination of the results. Our method depends on the size of the municipality. For municipalities of less than 10,000 inhabitants, we still run a traditional census 1 year out of 5. That means that each year, 20% of these municipalities are concerned by a census survey. For municipalities of more than 10,000 inhabitants, we have an exhaustive register of the dwellings, which is updated each year by INSEE, but also by the municipalities. And we run an annual survey of 8% of the dwellings. And then the census results are based on 5 years of census surveys. That's why our method is called a rolling census. So let's talk now about the numerous innovations we have to implement to adapt to changes in society and to modernize. First of all, as of 2015, we introduce an internet data collection. The first year, 33% of the inhabitants answered by on internet, and this rate increases year after year. Since in 2020, this is 62% of the inhabitants who answer by internet. We also did some changes in the protocol. For instance, with the deposit of the questionnaires with the internet code to answer in the mailbox for individual addresses instead of hand delivery by enumerators. We also made several changes in our questionnaire. One of them was to better assess the links between the persons who share the same dwelling, for instance. Then, in fact, the strength of our rolling census is that we have an annual survey with annual results. And this is a strength because this gives us the possibility to implement several tests before any evolution. When we want to change something in our protocol or in our questionnaire, we can have a test concerning a few number of households, for instance, 100, 200, and then the year after we can have a bigger test before deciding if we want to generalize or not this evolution. And this also enables us to assess the effects of the changes we want to implement on the results. And we can have, we can estimate this, the effects of the change before we decided it and also after we implemented it. For instance, we assessed the effect of the changes of our questionnaire on the estimates of the population. And we assessed that we had a decrease of the number of double counts, which is estimated at minus 500,000 people, which is minus 75%, and this is due to better explanations regarding the children sharing their time between two parents' home, especially sometimes both before the change of our questionnaire. Sometimes both mother and father declared the child on their census questionnaire. So this is an improvement that we implemented with this change of our questionnaire, and we can assess this improvement. Now, let's talk about the new challenges we faced in 2020 and 2021 with the COVID pandemic. In France, the lockdown occurred in March 2020, just after the 2020 census survey, and it was quite a relief for us that our census survey was already finished. Nevertheless, it impacted the post-collect controls. First of all, since people were stuck at home, we had to decide to have stronger prioritization. We implemented for the first time phone controls, and with the challenge to find the telephone numbers. And then we returned to the field when necessary, but just after the end of the lockdown. But in the end, we had half as many checks as usual. Concerning the 2021 survey, we initially adapted our procedures to propose Zoom trainings for the managers of the enumerators and to reduce contacts during the field survey. For instance, we wanted to forbid our enumerators to get inside the houses of the interviewees, just to reduce the risks. But finally, in November, with the increase of the pandemic, we had to postpone our 2021 survey for a year. Nevertheless, we will still disseminate results this year. Normally, our method of estimation is based on 5 years data collection. That means on 5 years of census surveys. Normally, at the end of this year, we will disseminate the census 2019 results, and we should use census surveys from 2017 to 2021. But we will not have data in 2021 since the census was postponed. Nevertheless, our method is quite resilient, and we will be able to adapt it slightly. First of all, by using administrative data for 1 more year in municipalities of less than 10,000 inhabitants. Normally, we already use this tax administrative data to estimate the population 2 years after the census survey in these municipalities. And so with the adapted method, we will have to use this administrative data for 1 more year. For municipalities of more than 10,000 inhabitants, we will still have the exhaustive register of dwellings, which was updated in 2020 and in 2021, just as usual. So we will have the number of dwellings just as usual. But we will have to make an estimation to estimate the number of inhabitants by dwellings, since we did not have a census survey in 2020. And once again, thanks to the annuality of our census method, we can assess the difference between the adapted method and the normal method. And we can do it using a year in the past, for instance, the year 2015, comparing the adapted method with a theoretical situation without COVID. Because we know that even if we decided to maintain the 2021 census survey, results would have been very different than without any COVID pandemic, because we think that we will have had a higher non-response rate and maybe different responses also. So for municipalities of less than 10,000 inhabitants, there will be no change in the estimation for 80% of these municipalities, because the estimation will be done just as usual. For the 20% left, the 20% of the municipalities which should have had the 2021 census survey, then the population will be overestimated by 0.04%. More precisely, for half of these municipalities, the difference is estimated between -1.3% and +2%. And the differences are higher for very small municipalities, since we have in France some municipalities of 10 inhabitants, 20 inhabitants, and a difference of just 1 inhabitant can be a 10% evolution. For municipalities over 10,000 inhabitants, we assessed that the population will be overestimated by 0.05% with the adapted method. And for half of the municipalities, the difference is between -0.6% and +0.6%. So thank you for your attention. And like Ralph Waldo Emerson would say about summer, especially after a year of COVID, I wish you all to live in the sunshine, swim in the sea, and drink in the wide air. Thank you.
Greetings, my name is Gary Dunnett, and today I'm going to speak about some work that we are doing at Statistics New Zealand to chart the path of our future censuses. In 2012, Statistics New Zealand agreed a census transformation strategy with the government. The vision, an administrative census with survey support, was aspirational, and we did not really know how far we might be able to get towards progressing this goal. The need for the strategy was driven by the fact that back in 2012, there were questions about the sustainability of the current model, especially the increasing cost of census, the challenges in obtaining responses, and how best to take advantage of the opportunities of new technology, and also the use of the ever-increasing availability of administrative data. The strategy has two strands, a short to medium-term focus on modernising the current census model and making it more efficient, and a long-term focus looking at the alternatives based on administrative data sources. The two strands were intended to work together, with the 2018 and following censuses aligned to the long-term direction. Broadly speaking, modernisation in the 2018 census involved shifting the majority of respondents online, which gives higher quality data than its paper equivalent and is more efficient and cheaper, where these savings could then be focused into the field collection where responses are difficult. This approach is very much in line with other countries, and we're essentially picking up the Canadian model, which has worked very successfully there, and is the approach for the Australian census in a few weeks. Another theme of modernisation was introducing the use of administrative data in line with the longer-term direction. In 2018, the most significant planned development was an administrative address list, which was needed for the post-out access codes for people to be able to respond online. Now, unfortunately, things didn't go as planned for our 2018 census, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. For the longer-term work, we started by looking at a number of different models, and in 2015 agreed with the government that we would actively work towards a census based on administrative data and supported by sample surveys. Looking back now, almost a decade later, the strategy has lasted and served us well, especially through the issues that we faced in 2018. To make this even more real, earlier this year, Statistics New Zealand refreshed its strategic directions with 4 key goals. One of those goals is to become an organisation that uses administrative data first, with a very explicit statement about the use of admin data in the future census. In the 2007 UN ECE paper, described 4 necessary preconditions for moving to a census based on administrative data. Firstly, there is a need for an appropriate legal environment to be established. The current 1975 New Zealand Statistics Act is highly prescriptive on how the census must be run. Statistics New Zealand is currently developing a new data and statistics bill that will provide flexibility and also make the use of administrative data for official statistics more enabling and transparent. The bill is planned to be passed later this year. However a census is run, it relies on public support, whether that is filling in a census form or using alternative sources for the information. This is not just about the census, but the underlying trust and confidence in Statistics New Zealand as a whole. There is a real challenge in measuring such trust and confidence, and a topic for a whole nother talk. But needless to say, we are working closely with New Zealand's Privacy Commissioner. Finally, the last 2 conditions are where the focus of the talk is: having suitable administrative sources and being able to link them. The 2018 New Zealand census didn't go as planned, and while we do not want to repeat, the experience highlighted the value of long-term research and the benefits of using administrative data, as well as showing some of its limitations. In 2018, we did not achieve the response rate we expected. Response was lower across the whole country, but more so in areas with higher Maori and Pacific populations. The final 2018 census dataset was a combination of census field responses, in green, an administratively based resident population to count people who had been missed, and the admin data as well as data from the previous census in 2013 provided missing characteristics, those represented in blue. You will note that for some variables, no data is available, and these can be seen in white. Overall, the approach worked well. It broke new ground for a traditional census and was of great interest internationally. The use of administrative data was clearly better than the imputed values that we had used in the past, and it showed that administrative data was able to count people who had not filled in the census forms in either 2013 or 2018. However, it also highlighted some limitations of admin data. The major one was the lack of alternative sources for iwi affiliation, which is of high interest for our Indigenous community and the New Zealand government alike. Another key difficulty has been reliably placing admin records into households and the importance of accurate address information. So looking ahead, with a census largely based on administrative data, our starting point is a list of resident population derived from administrative sources. Some census characteristics can be derived from administrative data, or a large sample survey will be run for the variables that we do not have alternative sources for. Our current estimates suggest that the sample would have to be about 5% of the population every year, or 25% over 5 years. This would give sample estimates down to the areas of approximately 10,000 people over the 5-year period. For variables that we do not have, for variables where we have to rely on the sample survey, there could be a loss of detailed information, especially for smaller geographies. As with the current census, we expect to need some coverage adjustment so that we can provide population measures that are accurate enough for official statistical purposes, such as allocation of health funding. This requires a coverage survey and a population estimation model. There are some key statistical methodologies that underpin all of this development that present some real challenges. We need the ability to link administrative sources without the benefit of a national population identifier that some other countries have. We also have a need for quality frameworks to assess how good administrative sources are for statistical purposes, and new ways to measure the quality of outputs based on multiple sources. For the population estimates, we need a method for constructing the admin population and then develop a statistical estimation models and an associated coverage survey so that we can measure and adjust for coverage errors. For the census characteristics, we have to derive them, develop imputation methods for missing data, and we will need some validation processes, as there is likely to be some misclassification errors. Finally, there is a large-scale attribute survey, and understanding how it fits with the existing household surveys is very important. And all these challenges are where we're focusing our R&D effort at present. One of the first things people say when you talk about using admin data is that it wasn't designed for statistical purposes. Absolutely right. And that's what statisticians are for. Admin data are a result of some administrative purpose like collecting tax, or a record of events like registering a birth or crossing New Zealand's border. There is always a need for some kind of transformation if it is to be used for a statistical purpose. The key question is, when is the admin data good enough? And the answer to that depends on your purpose. It's critical that you understand the admin sources really well and define your statistical purpose. And then ask, what are the strengths and limitations of the admin data and what kind of transformations are needed? We may even find that the data just won't fit. The rest of this talk is about how far we've got in answering those questions, with our purpose being to produce detailed population, social and economic characteristics for small areas and small communities. In other words, a census. First of all, we need many data sources to be integrated. Person-level data has been linked in the integrated data infrastructure known as the IDI. Admin sources include life events, migration, health, education, income, employment, justice, and more. The IDI also includes Stats New Zealand's household surveys along the 2013 and 2011 censuses. Data sources are all linked to a long central spine, which is constructed from the union of birth registrations since 1920. Visa applications since 1997, and tax registrations are used for the people who are not present in either sources. Given time constraints, I won't go into a lot of detail, but we have spent a lot of time improving the linkages that make up the spine, along with defining and understanding linkage error, the errors of the types of linking error, and their impact on the IDI. We do use a probabilistic record linkage, the Falegi-Sunta method, where there are two types of errors, false positives and false negatives. There is a trade-off between these two errors, and in the IDI, they aim to keep the false links below 2%. And the current linkage rates are between 80 and 98%. The next critical piece is constructing the admin resident population. We start with the long spine and use the signs of life approach. We select people who have been active in a range of sources. For example, they have paid tax or have been to the doctor or enrolled in education in the previous 2 years. Then we remove people who have died or migrated overseas before the reference date. Now we turn to the census social and economic characteristics. This picture describes the situation for individuals. There are similar diagrams for household and family characteristics and for dwellings and household information. The first thing to notice is that it is complex. The same source can be used for several variables, and a single variable can be derived from multiple sources. This helps improve coverage, but can also result in conflicting information, which needs to be resolved. The diagram shows the data system working as a whole, and also means that the perspective of a single agency will not be representative of the whole picture. Another aspect is the variables along the bottom that we have limited or no information for. We may need to gather this information through a sample survey. This diagram summarizes the quality assessments we have made for deriving the census variables from administrative data. They are based on an admin data quality framework that builds on the ideas of total survey error. The y-axis is coverage, that is, how much of the population do we have the information for? And the x-axis is measurement error, that is the admin data measuring the right thing? The light blue circles are variables where we have made a high-level assessment based on metadata. The dark blue circles are variables where detailed research has been completed and published on the StatsNZ website. The link will take you to an overview of our findings. For some cases, the lack of digitally available data prior to 1990 leave a historical gap, and so where we have confidence, we have used the 2023 census for some variables to improve coverage. Those are shown in the hashed circles. When we bring all this together, we find that we already have some key elements of an admin-based census. We released an experimental population statistics from linked admin data file in 2016, 2017, and 2018. And they included age, sex, geography, and ethnicity. Now we are extending that to more census variables with an experimental administrative population census. The first release is in August 2021. To start with, we have added population structure variables such as Maori descent, country of birth, and years in New Zealand. And in 2022 and 2023, we will add more variables such as work, income, and education. There will be output tables with nice R-Shiny interfaces for graphics and maps, and the unit record data will be available in the IDI from September. The data will be a time series from 2006 to 2020, and the underlying data is longitudinal so that transitions such as internal migration patterns can be analysed. We are really excited about this. Census planning has to look a long way forward, and it is hard to make something that seems a long way off feel real. And yet, if we are to fundamentally change the way the census is produced, we have to bring everyone on the journey with us. With the experimental admin census, we want to demonstrate what can be achieved with admin data now and seek feedback on the benefits and the ideas for where improvements can be made. So in summary, we have a short to medium term approach to use administrative data to modernise our census program. And in that light, building on our 2018 census experience, we are pursuing a combined model by design approach for our 2023 census. We are also developing a longer-term roadmap during 2024 for a future census primarily based on administrative data supported through large-scale sample surveys. We recognise the need to undertake a strong, active engagement with our customers, so to ensure that we meet their needs and take them on the journey for us. When you reflect on the 2007 UNECE paper that outlined the necessary conditions for an admin-based census supported by sample surveys, I hope you will see we're actively working towards our goal.
So everyone, welcome to this short discussion of our session. I hope you found the three talks informative and helpful, and I hope I can add a little bit of extra illumination and pull some of the themes together in my short discussion. My name is James Brown, and I'm a Professor of Statistics at the University of Technology, Sydney. So I'm going to give a short discussion of the three papers. So this session is being referred to as an evolution of the 21st century census of population and housing. And I think one of the things just to say at the start, and I assume will have come through to you in the talks, is that we are talking here very much about the evolution in countries that have not already been able to make that transition to register-based censuses. So there are many countries in the world that have already made a transition to full register-based, administrative-based censuses because of their particular systems of registers that exist. But there are still a large number of countries throughout the world that haven't been able to make that transition yet because they don't have the same register-based systems. And so this really is about that evolution that's taking place in those countries as they try and evolve their approach to census taking when they don't have quite that same ecosystem of registers that exists elsewhere. And so what we've been seeing in the three papers really, in particular in the paper referring to the Asia Pacific, we've been seeing a strong focus on technology, the use of administrative data in the support of that traditional census, that concept of going out and enumerating your entire population. And we've seen there was lots of discussion about better address lists, the introduction and the use of geocoding to get better locations for dwellings and households. This of course allows for more innovative products when we do publication, an increased use of things like online response, and even if you're not going for full online response, an increased use of self-enumeration, much less use in countries now of an interviewer collecting the census data. And also those alternative approaches for actually delivering the form in the first place. So if you've got online response, delivering letters with codes, or just delivering forms, having forms posted back. So this is all being able to be built off that evolution of high quality address lists that are generated, at least in the first place, of administrative data. So we're seeing that evolution of the role of administrative data in the support and the role of technology in the support of that traditional census taking model. We're also seeing this move, this evolution, this focus on what I might say methodological approaches to estimation. So reducing the focus on always doing complete enumeration. So this has actually been a model that's existed in many forms around the world for a long time, where there's been the concept of short form and long form census, where the short form was collecting the very basic demographic information of the individuals and households, and the long form that was only being completed by a sample was collecting that data, the rich, wide data that we come to expect from a census. That approach in the rolling census, the French rolling census, has been taken further to this concept of just having an annual survey approach and then using estimation across time, combining the data across time. So we heard there about how the census for 2018 would be using data from 2019 and 2020 in front, and also using data from 2017 and 2016 behind to come up with an estimate for the point in the middle at 2018. And that combining across time is also enhanced with the use of administrative data. So we heard that distinction between certain geographic areas that need to be completely enumerated because they're municipalities, the small ones, that get completely enumerated once every 5 years, and then administrative data is used to help update in the intervening period. And in the larger municipalities, there's a sample taken every year, but there's still this combining across time and this use of administrative data in that combining. In New Zealand in 2018, they also utilised administrative data to actually help enumerate and fill in data for individuals that were missed by the traditional census enumeration. Now, that wasn't an evolution that New Zealand particularly planned, but because of the work that we heard from Gary, because of the work that they've been doing to work towards more administrative use, they were actually able to use that approach to help support their traditional census where its enumeration had fallen short. And we heard that I think very exciting approach being utilised in Afghanistan, where again it's similar, I think, to the idea of the French rolling census, where you're doing little mini censuses in some small areas where you can get in and do those small counts, those small area counts, and then putting the whole picture together by using, in this case, data collected through satellite data, satellite imaging, to actually construct up population estimates, to build models between that field data in those small areas and the whole population, build models using those relationships with satellite data to construct estimates for the whole population in a situation where it simply would not be possible or to do a full census enumeration in any traditional sense of the word. So we've got there some very interesting evolution there in terms of thinking about the use of the administrative data and technology to support our traditional census, and the way that we're starting to use our statistical estimation approaches to think about how we can estimate our populations without having to do complete enumeration all of the time. And I think hidden behind those evolutions, particularly around the estimation, I think is there a recognition that our census has several purposes. It clearly is our tool for enumerating the population with its basic demographic and geographic distribution. And by basic demographics, I mean essentially age and sex, and maybe some of our background characteristics such as our ethnicity could be very important in many situations. And that geographic distribution, how we distribute in our geographic locations across our nation states. It also enumerates dwellings and households. So the dwelling structures where households actually locate themselves, and then the household structures within them, the way that we combine and live with each other. And of course that is something that itself is evolving over time. We have much more complex household structures today in many societies than probably were in existence in the past. And of course it gives us that very rich data, that wide data. So I'm thinking of the census. You can think of a census as it gives you long data, it enumerates the entire population, but it also gives us wide data. It tends to give us quite rich information about our populations, and it does that for very small geographic areas. And importantly, it also does it for those small special population subgroups. And so, for example, in Australia, the census is really the way in which we can really see those areas of poverty, for example in Sydney, in the areas which are predominantly wealthy areas. So there'll be areas of Sydney that everybody would say that's an area of wealth, but within that area of wealth there will be pockets, small subgroups of poverty, and you only really see those and you have something like a census that really gets that very, very detailed information at very low levels of geography. So we've got those two purposes. There's that enumeration, the length of our population, and then there's that enumeration, the breadth of information in our population. And so when you think about what a traditional census is doing, it gives us that point in time benchmark. It tells us what our population size and distribution is at that particular point in time. But these are expensive exercises, and without thinking about how costs are actually increasing probably every cycle for many countries, even before that, cost really prevents that exercise from occurring on a frequent basis. And so we tend to use other population estimation approaches between our censuses to keep a handle on our population size and its basic distribution. And when you think about that very rich, wide data, it gives us that very high accuracy at a particular point in time. But if you think about all those detailed outputs, there's that slow degradation in quality as time moves away from census day. Because of course the population is itself evolving, and at those low levels of geography, sometimes that evolution can be quite rapid. And so that fixed representation from a particular point in time of our population is losing quality as we move away in time. And so what we've been seeing there was, particularly in the New Zealand approach and the New Zealand talk, we saw about that use of the linked administrative data sources to give us that enumeration of the length of the population. So that size of the population and its basic demographics. Now, there are still issues there. Gary referred to the issue around household structures. Many of these administrative data sources that we can link together are data sources that capture activities of individuals. They don't necessarily capture activities across individuals within the same household. And even when sometimes individuals, you can see those individuals belong in the same household, we still don't know what kind of structure they have inside that household. But very excitingly, of course, once you start using administrative data and doing these linkage approaches, there's the opportunity for much more timely data, perhaps even annual data with longitudinal flows. And the exciting thing is that we're in a position where we can explore how well these approaches can work by looking back at some history. And so in New Zealand, they're producing historical annual estimates from these administrative data sources, creating these annual pictures and these longitudinal flows, and tracking how they're able to do that relative to what they would understand the population structure to be from their more traditional estimation approaches, as they evolve towards moving to using those administrative approaches for enumerating the length of their population. And then we see with the French rolling census, you've got these rolling surveys that are enumerating the breadth of the population characteristics. Now, it's clear, and if you look in, and although it wasn't referred to in the talk today, if you look at the work that was done when they were planning the French rolling census, there's a recognition that the rolling census cannot give you the same point-in-time accuracy at those lowest levels of aggregation at the time a traditional census occurs. But what it does is it gives you a much smoother level of quality. The quality doesn't change across time. Each year you get estimates that have very similar quality year on year on year. And so overall, when you look at the quality over time, this approach to producing annual data using rolling surveys gives you a more stable level of quality that overall works out to be better than a point in time accuracy that is very, very high but can potentially degrade quite rapidly in between the enumerations. And there's that sense of that evolution that we really are moving towards populations that change more rapidly, and a desire to pick up that change and a desire to have more timely data that, yes, maybe doesn't ever again have that same unique point in time accuracy as the traditional census, but gives us high quality data in all aspects of quality. In particular, the timeliness aspect gives us that high quality picture of our evolving populations on a much more regular basis than traditional census. And I can't finish now without mentioning COVID-19, and the speakers all talked about some of the impacts around COVID-19. But one of the things that's come through, I think, in the talks is that as we move to models that have less reliance on a single point in time enumeration, you have some inbuilt resilience when you face these kinds of shocks. And that was illustrated by, in the talk on the French rolling census, where they talked about the delay of the 2021 data collection and how they're able to use the structure to actually miss a year's data collection without having too much degradation on quality. And again, in the same way that New Zealand are demonstrating the potential of their administrative data using historical years, the French have been able to demonstrate that the quality will not be impacted too much by going back in time and dropping a year from estimation, recalculating estimates and demonstrating that there is not a big impact from this dropping of a single year. In the Asia Pacific talk, we heard about the fact that the use of more variety in these in the collection approaches in traditional collections is also giving some resilience. So greater push for those self-response approaches, be that post-out, post-back approaches, or even drop-off delivery and return approaches, things that rely much less on that direct face-to-face contact for an interview are really allowing countries to have resilience against the impacts of COVID-19 on field collection. And particularly online response really gives a very strong protection. And those approaches are only possible because there's been this increased use of administrative data in the planning. So that is also aiding resilience. That's not to say it's a perfect situation. There is the talk there we heard about, of course, this use of having to use online approaches to train interviewers, to train data collectors is clearly not as optimal as our more traditional approaches to training people. Although Gary wasn't talking about COVID-19, he did talk about the experience in 2018 in New Zealand, where the traditional census, with its modern approaches for online first and so on, did not get the response that they would have expected and that they were looking for, but they were able to make use of administrative data to recover some of that lost enumeration. So they were able to actually add individuals into the census data file using the administrative data. Now, there were issues there around, again, the placement of households and the individuals within households. That's still difficult from those individual level administrative data files, but nonetheless, there's already been an example there of a strong recovery for a traditional census enumeration that was not able to achieve the coverage that it would normally achieve. So I think that gives for us going forward as we go through this cycle, and countries that will be producing estimates from their traditional census, because there has been an evolution in the background in the use of administrative data, there are strong possibilities there for exploring some of the approaches used in New Zealand in 2018 to enhance and recover some of the lost enumeration should that occur in a more traditional situation. So I'll stop there and say thank you for joining our session, thank you for listening to the talks, and thank you to James Chipperfield at ABS for organising the session. Please do stay safe in this changing environment. I'm coming from Sydney. We've had a long period of very nice lifestyle, but as I'm recording this, I'm now at the end of my second week staying at home and facing another week at home. So I will be joining the ISI Congress from home because I will have no choice. But do all stay safe, and thank you for listening.